David had spent most of his life doing exactly what smart people are told to do, studying hard, making careful decisions, and avoiding obvious mistakes, yet he still checked his bank account with a feeling he couldn't explain. At 41, he earned more money than his parents ever had, owned a home, held a respectable career, and looked successful to almost everyone around him. The strange part was that every time he thought he was finally getting ahead, some invisible force seemed to pull the finish line farther away. One night, he opened an old tax return from 10 years earlier and discovered something that left him staring at the screen in silence. Despite years of raises, promotions, and smarter decisions, the gap between what he earned and what he actually kept had barely changed, and that realization led him to a question most people never think to ask. Most people believe intelligence naturally leads to better financial outcomes, but money follows rules that intelligence alone cannot always overcome. The uncomfortable truth is that many smart people stay broke for reasons that have very little to do with knowledge. In fact, some of the habits that create success in school and careers can quietly create problems when applied to money. Here's the strange part. Those habits often feel completely logical while they're happening. Smart people are trained to solve visible problems, but many financial problems are hidden inside systems that rarely announce themselves. David never struggled to understand information, compare options, or make thoughtful decisions, yet none of those abilities seemed to create the financial progress he expected. Every year his income increased, but so did the complexity of his life, and the two often moved together more closely than he realized. The larger paycheck felt like progress at first. Then new expenses quietly arrived. A slightly nicer home, a newer vehicle, a few more subscriptions, and higher expectations slowly absorbed money that once would have felt significant. Give me a minute, because this is where the story starts becoming surprisingly common. Most lifestyle changes do not feel extravagant when they happen one small decision at a time over many years. What feels like a harmless upgrade today can become a permanent monthly obligation that follows you for decades. Economists sometimes describe this pattern as lifestyle inflation, where spending rises alongside income and quietly limits wealth accumulation. The process is gradual enough that people often feel financially stuck, even while objectively earning more than ever before. David wasn't wasting money recklessly. In many ways, he was doing what responsible adults are expected to do. That is exactly why the pattern remained invisible for so long, because the decisions looked reasonable when viewed individually. I know what you're thinking. Plenty of people increase spending and still build wealth over time. And that's true, but the really important part is what happens when intelligence itself starts reinforcing the cycle. Smart people are often confident in their ability to figure things out later, which can make today's financial commitments feel less risky than they actually are. A larger mortgage payment seems manageable because future promotions appear likely and future income feels almost guaranteed. The problem is that financial systems do not reward confidence nearly as much as they reward margin. Margin is the space between what you earn and what you need, and that space becomes increasingly valuable during uncertainty. When margin disappears, even highly capable people can begin feeling trapped by decisions that once felt perfectly reasonable. David slowly realized that most of his financial stress wasn't coming from low income. It was coming from a lack of flexibility. The freedom to say no, change direction, take risks, or survive setbacks had become smaller than he imagined. Here's where things get interesting, because this pattern extends far beyond individual behavior. Modern economies are remarkably effective at encouraging consumption while making long-term wealth accumulation feel distant and abstract. Spending produces an immediate emotional reward, while saving often produces little emotional feedback in the moment. The human brain naturally pays more attention to immediate rewards than future possibilities. This tendency helped our ancestors survive. It doesn't always help build wealth. Behavioral economists call this present bias, the tendency to value immediate benefits more heavily than future benefits. Imagine being offered $100 today or $120 a month from now. Many people choose the immediate reward, even when the math clearly favors waiting. the decision feels small in isolation. Repeated thousands of times, it can reshape an entire financial life. David began noticing how often convenience quietly won over long-term outcomes. Faster delivery, upgraded plans, premium features, easy financing, and monthly payments all reduce friction while increasing ongoing costs. None of these choices seem disastrous. Most people never notice this, because the danger rarely comes from one large decision. It comes from dozens of reasonable decisions that gradually compound into a financial structure with very little room to breathe. And once that structure is built, escaping it becomes much harder than avoiding it in the first place. By this point, David understood something he had never been taught, that being smart and being wealthy are related skills, but they are not the same skill. Intelligence helps people earn opportunities, while wealth often depends on what happens after those opportunities arrive. Many high earners spend years optimizing income while giving far less attention to asset ownership. Income is important, but income alone rarely creates lasting financial security. Assets behave differently because they can continue producing value without requiring the same amount of ongoing effort. This is where things change. David stopped asking how he could make more money and started asking why so little seemed to remain. That question led him toward a completely different way of thinking. Instead of viewing every dollar as spending power, he began viewing each dollar as a future decision waiting to be made. The perspective sounded simple, yet it changed how he evaluated nearly everything. A purchase was no longer only about cost. It was also about opportunity. Every dollar spent could no longer be saved, invested, used for flexibility, or reserved for future choices. Economists refer to this as opportunity cost, though most people experience it without consciously recognizing it. Give me a minute, because opportunity cost becomes far more powerful when viewed across time. Imagine two people earning similar incomes for 20 years. One consistently increases obligations whenever income rises, while the other allows a portion of every raise to strengthen savings, investments, or financial reserves. The difference may seem insignificant during the first few years. Over decades, the outcomes can begin separating dramatically, not because one person was smarter, because one person preserved more options. Wealth is often misunderstood as a number. In reality, it can also be viewed as stored flexibility, the ability to handle uncertainty without immediately changing your lifestyle. David realized that many of his financial decisions had been designed to maximize comfort in the present rather than resilience in the future. And once he saw that pattern, he started noticing it almost everywhere. He noticed it in advertising that encouraged people to focus on monthly payments instead of total costs. He noticed it in conversations where income received more attention than savings, investments, or financial independence. He noticed it in workplaces where promotions were celebrated immediately while disciplined financial habits remained largely invisible. The system wasn't necessarily designed to keep people broke, but it was designed to keep money moving. Economic growth depends heavily on spending, borrowing, upgrading, replacing, and consuming over time. Individual wealth building often requires delaying some of those impulses and accepting rewards that arrive much later. That creates a natural tension between human psychology and long-term financial outcomes. Here's the strange part. Understanding this tension can be more valuable than learning another budgeting technique. Once David recognized the forces influencing his decisions, he became less focused on appearing successful and more focused on becoming financially resilient. The shift was subtle. His lifestyle did not change overnight. His identity began changing first. He stopped seeing every raise as permission to spend more and started seeing it as an opportunity to increase flexibility. He stopped measuring progress by possessions and started measuring progress by the distance between income and obligation. The numbers did not transform instantly, but his relationship with money slowly began transforming. And honestly, that's the part many people overlook. Financial change often starts long before account balances visibly reflect it. It begins when a person starts noticing patterns that previously felt normal. Smart people stay broke not because they lack intelligence, but because intelligence alone cannot overcome unconscious habits, incentives, and systems operating in the background. The people who eventually build lasting wealth often learn to examine those invisible forces instead of assuming more income will solve every problem. That realization is rarely dramatic. It usually arrives quietly, the moment someone understands that wealth is less about what passes through their hands and more about what remains under their control. And for David, the journey began the night he discovered that earning more had never been the real question, because the real question was why so little had been staying with him all along.